Hi everyone, welcome back to Math Specs. My name is Stephanie, and today we're going to discuss the multiplication of real numbers. So first we're going to start off by discussing the rules of the sign of the product for non-zero numbers. So that's when we multiply two numbers that are not zero, and we want to know what the sign of our answer is going to be. So for the first one, we have that we want to know what will be the sign of the product when we multiply two negative numbers. So when we multiply two negative numbers, say for example, -2 times -2, our answer is going to be positive. We will have a positive answer when we multiply two negative numbers. So if I have -2 times -2, then my answer will be positive 4. Same as if we were to multiply fractions together that are negative. So -1/2 times -1/2 will give me a positive 1/4. Okay. For B, we have that we want to know the sign of the product when we multiply a negative number times a positive number. So we have -2 times +2. And the sign of our product will be negative. So we multiply a negative number times a positive number in any order. So if we were to multiply 2 times -2, that our answer would still be negative, and 2 times 2 would give us 4. Okay, so if we were to multiply -1/2 times +1/3, we have a -1/2 times a +1/3, so our answer would be negative, and it would be 1/6. Okay. For the last one, we want to know the sign of the product when we multiply a positive number times a positive number. So we were to have 2 times 2, or if we were to have 1/2 times 1/2. So for both of these, we have two positive numbers being multiplied to each other, so our answer will also be positive. So when we multiply a positive 2 times a positive 2, our answer will be a positive 4. Or if we multiply a positive 1/2 times another positive 1/2, then our answer will be a positive 1/4. Okay. I suggest you make flashcards for these, and you can write your own examples, or you can use the examples I've used here. Make sure to include examples with whole numbers like this, and also include maybe your own fraction examples as well. Okay, so let's go ahead and continue to the next slide. So here we're asked to use the rules that we just discussed in order to find the product. So for A, I have a -3 times a positive 5, and I know that a negative times a positive is going to give me a negative, and 3 times 5 will give me 15, so my final answer is -15. For B, I have positive 4 times positive 4, and I know that a positive number times a positive number will give me a positive number, so I multiply 4 times 4, and that will give me 16. For our final answer is positive 16. For C, we have a -2 times a -2. And if you recall, a negative number times a negative number will give you a positive number. So that's the sign of our result. So what is 2 times 2? It's going to give you 4. Okay. For D, we have -2 times +3 times +5. So for this problem, you can actually go about this in two different ways, which is what we're going to learn in the next slide about the associative property, meaning that we can start our multiplication here with -2 times 3, or we can start our multiplication with 3 times 5. So I know that sometimes that negative sign can be a bit intimidating. So students would like to start here with the positive numbers, and that's completely fine. But you can do both ways and you'll still get the same answer. So if I were to start with -2 times 3, I have a -2 times a positive 3. So I know that my answer is going to be negative, because a negative times a positive will give me a negative answer. So 2 times 3 is going to give me 6. Now I can bring down my positive 5, and I have a negative number times a positive number. So now I know that my answer is going to be negative. 6 times 5 is going to give me 30, and our result is -30. For the right-hand side, instead of starting with the -2, I'm going to start multiplying 3 times 5, which are both positive numbers. So positive times a positive will give me a positive 15. And I bring down my -2. So now I have a negative number times a positive number, and I know that my result will be negative. So 2 times 15 will also give me 30, and my final result will be -30. So as you can see here on the left-hand side and on the right-hand side, although we started multiplying different groups of numbers, we still got the same result. So we're going to talk about some properties of multiplication, and some of these are good for you to remember when we are tackling different problems. So for the first one, we have the closure property, which states that the product of any two real numbers is a unique real number. So A times B is a unique number. So when we multiply, say for example, 4 times 2, our unique number from this product is going to be 8 versus 1 times 6, it'll be 6, okay? For the commutative property, it states that the order in which we multiply two numbers does not change the final answer. So if I were to tell you to multiply 2 times 4, and someone else were to tell you to multiply 4 times 2, on the left-hand side, 2 times 4 is going to give me 8, and on the right-hand side, 4 times 2 will also give me 8. So the order didn't matter. Whether the 2 came first or whether the 4 came first, we still got the same answer. And this can also be true if we use negative numbers. If someone asks you to multiply -1 times +3, or if I ask you to multiply +1 times -1, +3 times -1, then on the left-hand side we'll get -3, and on the right-hand side we'll also get -3. So the order which we multiply two numbers does not change the final answer. For the associative property, it states that in the way that we group three numbers when multiplying does not change the answer either. And we actually just saw an example of this in the previous slide. So if I were to tell you to multiply 1 times 4 and then multiply 2, or if someone were to tell you to multiply 4 times 2 and then multiply 1, you would still get the same answer. So on the left-hand side, I have 1 times 4, and that will give me 4. And I drop down the 2, that will give me 8. On the right-hand side, I have 4 times 2 here. That will give me 8. And then I multiply by 1, that will also give me 8. So as you can see, the way in which we group these three numbers does not change our final answer. For the identity property, it basically states that whenever we multiply a number times 1, that number is still the same. So that number retains its identity. So if I were to multiply 1 times 2, our answer is still 2. So by multiplying 1 times this number, our number's identity doesn't change. Same if I were to multiply it by a -3. 1 times -3 will give me -3. So that 1 does not change the identity of the -3. It's still in our product, it's still -3. For the property of 0, we state that the product of a number and 0 will be 0. So here, if I were to multiply 0 times 1/2, then my answer will be 0. I could multiply 0 times 1,000,000, and our answer would be 0. Okay. And finally, for the property of -1, we state that when we multiply a number and -1, we get the opposite of that number. So when, say for example, I multiply -1 times a +2, so -1 is going to make 2 its opposite. So since it's positive, the opposite of a positive number will be negative, so we'll get -2. Or if we have -1 times -2, so then the opposite of -2 will be +2. You can also think of this by using our rules of multiplication. Since we have a negative number times a positive number, our answer is going to be negative. And here, since we have a negative number times a negative number, our answer is positive. But -1 does change the sign of our number. It turns it into the opposite. So let's continue. And here we're asked to simplify the expressions with multiplication. So here we have -4 times -x. I know that I have a negative number times a negative number because we have a -1 right here that we can't see. It's invisible. So I know that a negative times a negative is going to give me a positive answer. 4 times x will be 4x. For b, I have +5 times -b times -b. And here I'm going to use the associative property, and I'm going to multiply -b and -b together first, and then multiply 5. So I have a negative times a negative, so I know that my answer is going to be positive. B times b, well, I still carry my variable, but here I have exponents. I have a 1 and a 1. And when we multiply these two, we add their exponents. So that will be 2. And I drop down my 5. So my answer is positive 5b squared. For C, I have negative 1 times negative a, and the negative a is raised to the second power. So I can distribute that in so that I have a negative a squared. And I have a negative times a negative, so I know that my final answer will be positive. And I have 1 times a squared, so my answer is going to be a squared, positive a squared. Okay. And here we can use that that negative 1 property, since I'm multiplying a negative 1 times a number, and this number just happens to be a variable, and it's negative as well. So since I'm multiplying by a negative 1, then our answer is going to be the opposite of whatever this is, and this is negative a squared multiplied by negative 1. The opposite of this will be positive a squared. Okay. Here we have 8 times negative n, and you can also think of this as 8 times negative 1 times n. So we have 8 times negative 1, so 8 times, positive 8 times a negative 1 will give you a negative number. 8 times 1 will give you 8, and we bring down the n, okay? You can also think of this using the property of the negative 1. So since we're multiplying negative 1 times an 8, the opposite of 8 will be negative, okay?